A lot of people say that arm wrestling being in the Olympics is something like the end goal or the pinnacle for all sports to aim towards, but I don't think so. People have this idea that achieving access to the Olympics carries this sense of prestige and achievement, which it did perhaps once do. But the modern day Olympics, in my opinion anyway, are nothing except an ever-escalating system of bureaucracies and ways to push money around and manipulate things. People have this idea that arm wrestling needs to push towards making the events themselves exciting for the audience, which is certainly a fine goal for the sport itself. But they also tend to say that the Western style of arm wrestling organization with celebrities and super matches is where this should be encouraged, with the Eastern more tournament and nationalized competitions being much more elongated and generally boring to watch, which certainly has some merit. But as we've just seen from the specific arm wrestling style that the Olympic channel featured, that boring tournament style of sport is exactly what the Olympic officials want, if they want anything. And why is that? Why have they not swept up Larry Wheels and King of the Table, etc.? Because both of those are independent companies who are not really affiliated or linked to people except themselves, their sponsors, and the athletes. With the Eastern tournament style, which is very in line with the typical state-sponsored sports schemes which are very much the mainstay of the Soviet and Soviet-affiliated blocs in Europe, there is much more access to every level of organization. The individual athlete is not so much a celebrity, but instead a tool for these organizations to present themselves to the world in case anybody wants to pay attention. Unless they are an Olympic champion, and even better, an enduring one, the chances of an athlete in the Olympo state system making more than an average income is very low. Consider the costs of training full-time towards an Olympic position. It is a full-time job, but you don't get paid for it, and you are too tired or don't have time and are normally unwilling to sacrifice that main goal by working on top of that to actually gain an income. And there are costs for the training itself. You may be a member of a state-sponsored group, but the equipment you use will not be free, and the medical and travel expenses too will not be free either. The vast majority of athletes who compete at the Olympics can hope at best to break even. At the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing, Hong Kong was offering the largest reward for an athlete winning a gold medal, at $642,000 per gold, and Turkey next in line with $380,000 per gold medal. And it's worth noting that neither of these countries have ever won gold at the Winter Olympics, so this might just be an incentive that runs little risk. And then the USA offers $37,500 for a gold medal athlete. This might sound like a decent chunk of cash to get in one lump, but when you factor in the outgoing funds during the Olympic period leading up to that, which we'll use for maximal positivity as 4 years, since that's how Olympic cycles typically go, but in reality it's much more like the entire lifetime of the athlete leading up to that specific Olympic Games. According to the latest data from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, the annual mean wage for a full-time wage or salary worker in the United States is $53,490 per year for a 40-hour work week. So spread over 4 years, the athlete reward amounts to $9,375 per year, which is 5.7 times less than they would earn working an ordinary full-time job. There is now the option for athletes to gain more sponsorships alongside this, and some will receive stipends from the country themselves if they are deemed worth investing in. But from the eyes of the sponsors, is it really worth investing this money in an athlete that has no real visible potential to become famous? And now you see why the PED use becomes so crucial in Olympic sports. And as for stipends, and I can only tell you this anecdotally, but I have heard directly from an athlete, one of the most promising athletes in the UK, who has been to the Olympics, they receive a yearly stipend of a few £1,000s, which amounts to barely enough to cover the cost of travel to international competitions. But forget that average person. Assuming the athlete has managed to bag 1 of 2 gold medals in their lifetime, what do they do after they retire? They have spent their whole life training for one specific thing for a very minimal salary, and they have generally a very limited set of trained skills at the end of it, but are at an age where going back to learn new skills at this point is very difficult to manage, more from logistical and time issues than anything else. So what do they normally do? They go back into their system to train further athletes to replace them. Obviously there are standout figures who become celebrities and manage to gain independence from the system, but how many of the other athletes do you actually hear anything about existing past retirement? But the Olympics as an organisation is not cheap, and the people involved at the highest levels are certainly not poor. So where does the money go? It's certainly not the athletes or the people who train them. And arm wrestling in the tournament Eastern style is organised in much the same way. The athlete pays to enter competitions and their training is almost entirely done at their own expense. For what? So they can win a gold medal ideally, but mostly because they just like the sport itself, which is why most athletes get into sports in the first place. So this is why, if arm wrestling does get into the Olympics, this will be the branch of arm wrestling that they choose to use, because they can meddle and channel any profit upwards through the bureaucracies and away from the actual athletes. But what about the Western supermatch styles? Probably if arm wrestling does get into Olympics, a different format will have to be adopted, assuming the Olympic Committee does not want to sit through a day-long tournament until a winner emerges from each class. It might be a supermatch or a very limited style system. I'm not sure, but I'd certainly like to hear any ideas. But back to the Western style supermatch, where there is a much higher emphasis on making the athletes themselves into an asset, because the amount of them is much less at the final stages, and because the sport itself depends so much on the fan favourites clashing. And then those celebrity style athletes, just like the WWE and MMA, helped bring in more money to the few organisations involved, and those organisations benefit from the athletes being better supported and promoted. Without Larry Wheels or Devon Larratt, the Western style of arm wrestling would probably take a massive drop in popularity. It is a very capitalist style, profit-driven system, but it does, in my opinion, bring much more profit and potential business to the athlete as an individual. Look at how famous Devon is now versus a few years ago. Both he and the organisations have been able to build off of each other. And the best thing about arm wrestling as a non-Olympic sport is that, especially in this Western supermatch style, it doesn't hold so much of an expiry date for the athletes. Athletes don't stop being good past 25 years old because the sport has a much greater reliance on brute strength and especially tendon strength, which is not a thing that comes at all without age. So for the sake of the sport and the athletes themselves, I don't think aiming for the Olympics is worthwhile at all, except for the Eastern Tournament state-sponsored style system. I think although some of us may enjoy that style, as a profitable route it is not so much worth pursuing. The Western supermatch celebrity style system holds much more prospect for the individual athlete and does not require as much of a full-time investment away from anything else to be able to succeed even a little bit. But that's just me. What do you think? Let me know whatever thoughts you might have on this subject, and if you've survived this far, you might as well give it a like and subscribe. We are very close to 1,000 subscribers now, so just adding a few more will help the movement towards being able to monetize and make this a more financially stable and sensible option for me to pursue, which almost definitely results in more and hopefully better content for you. And other than that, as always, I'll see you later.